Just let me introduce myself. I'm Eric. I'm the founder of the Monroe Falls Paranormal Society, and this is Scott Wells. We're going to have a two-part here today, and we're looking at both the hard and soft sciences. Scott's going to start his presentation first, and then after he's finished, we'll roll into some of the more advanced technical stuff here. So, without further ado.
Well, as you know, most of the paranormal groups tend to touch on the same kind of subjects. A lot of us use the same kind of techniques that we're all familiar with: the EMF detectors, the digital voice recorders, things for EVPs and things like that. We'd like to bring in a little bit different approaches to these things because we get too much into a rut when we just rely on single. Pardon me, I'm really tired this morning because I was here with the ghost hunt last night. So we tend to rely on the same things over and over again. You kind of get into a rut. You kind of get the same information over and over and over again. We're really trying to pull it into really getting the kind of data and the kind of information that we can use in order to prove the existence of the paranormal to a wider audience and bring that to it. Now, in some of these cases, we do use new technologies, and Eric will be speaking about that more a little bit later. This is going to be sensor technologies that aren't normally used in the field right now, but we're kind of touching on the cutting edge of that sort of technology. But we also look into what I call the soft sciences. Now, what do I mean by hard and soft sciences? Well, the hard sciences, are the ones that rely on the hard data. This is the things that you normally will see physicists want. This is repeatable experimental data that they can take into their laboratories and reproduce these things step for step, what you've done, and be able to duplicate your results. It's not just physics, it's chemistry, it's mathematics, it's anything that relies on that kind of data. Soft sciences, on the other hand, take a slightly different approach. Soft sciences are things like history, anthropology, folklore studies, sociology. All of these things can't really rely on the same kind of reproducible data because these things are so dependent on the people that are involved in the cases that they have. It's different cultures, it's different belief systems, it's different frameworks of reference that people are looking into that shape these kind of fields. That's why when you look at an anthropological study, they talk in very general terms. And it's a different approach because you can't always reproduce the same results, but you can see trends, you can see commonalities, you see things that actually will give you a picture of something that tends to be the case even though you can't measure it. And actually, ethnographers first noticed this, that when we look at a field such as parapsychology, where people were attempting to go and they were measuring these supposed paranormal powers, mental telepathy, clairvoyance, things like that in laboratory situations, they weren't able to reproduce it. And yet, the ethnographers that were in the field, working with the people in the field, were noticing that they were seeing these results over and over and over again. And so the thought came, well, why don't we start looking at it from this point of view rather than the point of view of necessarily the hard sciences? It's not the only, I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a growing field called para-anthropology, is what that's all about. But there are other soft sciences that we bring into play in these things. And it speaks to some extent to the kind of breadth of knowledge that when you're doing a paranormal investigation, you want to bring into the situation, into the home, in order to be able to give your clients the best service that you possibly can. One of the most common things that's done by pretty much all groups is looking at things historically. Of course, we're going to go in and we're going to research the history of the location where a supposed haunting is, or we're going to look into the situation where there is a UFO case that's been documented. We've been asked to actually look specifically into the history of a UFO case that took place here here in Stowe, over behind Kent Airport, which took place in the 1960s, in which a man claimed that he was driving home late one night and came by the airport and accidentally supposedly hit an alien being that was on the street that was behind the airport. There were a number of these figures that were seen that he saw, and he actually said he killed one of them by hitting it with his car, and their ship was off to the side. It shook him up so badly that he never really recovered from it. He died some years later. And we were asked to look into this by a person who was intrigued with this and was able to provide us some documents about the case. Unfortunately, most everybody that was involved in the case had passed away or moved away, or we were unable to contact, so we were able to not really go very far into that. But we were able to delve into the history of the case through newspaper archives, through actually looking into the Project Blue Book files, as it was one of the ones investigated by Project Blue Book. And so we were able to delve into some of the history of that. But again, when you're doing these kind of things with things in the past, you find gaps, you're going to have to make some judgment calls about things. You need to be able to look at things even that you find within a house, or the artifacts within a house, and see what historical context these things fell into. These would be things that we've encountered on cases, bottles, toys, and pieces of industrial equipment, things that we've found that had some significance in the cases, not only in the history of the place that we were investigating, but also in the place of the events that were occurring. We had one case where there was a ball that was thrown that came out of an area, a tunnel that was in there. That was at there's the plant that was over in Ravenna. Remember?
Yeah.
Was that a rubber plant?
Yes, yeah, but I don't think we can give the name of it, but it was a rubber factory, right?
Yeah, it was a rubber factory over there, and a rubber ball came bouncing out of one of the tunnels underneath the place that was very old, very thin. And come to think of it, actually, somebody yesterday told us a story about that, similar to that, actually, over at the Puffer Belly. But that's one of the things that most groups do, is that kind of historical research when they're doing that. One of the other things that we bring into it, one of my pet peeves, actually, I'll admit that right up front, is many times people will come to us and say, have you investigated Crybaby Bridge?
Which
one
one?
of you have heard of Crybaby Bridge? A lot of you? Okay.
There's about 15 of them.
I'm sorry, I can't see you. But the light's on my glasses. I can't see a darn thing out here. There's about 15 Crybaby Bridges in Ohio that I know of. All have pretty much the same story. The story is also common in Michigan. It's common in Connecticut. And that's one of the things that I refer to as a folkloric ghost story. And a lot of these are passed along as truth. These are real ghost stories that people have heard. And, oh yeah, I know where the real Crybaby Bridge is. But the thing is, these, in a lot of cases, are actually stories that are just part of the urban folklore of an area. You're going to find those kind of things all over the place. Many of the ones in this area that you've probably heard of, Gore Orphanage, course, the infamous crybaby bridges, the pumpkin heads. These are all just stories. And in fact, there's a field of study, or I shouldn't say a field of study, there is a reference to these kind of things known as legend tripping, where these are kind of safe environments where teenagers especially can kind of dare each other to go and see how brave they are by going and spending the night at Crybaby Bridge and, you know, tempting fate at Gore Orphanage to see which spirits are going to come and do that. And we have to actually, a lot of times, be able to distinguish between both the real stories and these folkloric stories. Now, the folkloric stories themselves are fascinating, but in some cases, we get cases which are a combination of these things. Well, you know, where we're investigating a general area, and somebody will be able to tell us, oh, well, these occurrences are happening in the house, you know, and out here, oh, well, there's a crybaby bridge down the road, and that's part of this whole thing. People will draw those kind of parallels and conclusions and assume that because they've heard these stories that oftentimes that's affecting them in some way. And a lot of times you need to break it to them kind of gently that that's not actually real. But on the other side of the coin, you've also got something very similar to that, and that is a knowledge of pop culture. We've actually had a couple cases in which pop culture has actually, strangely enough, played a major role in the investigations we've been asked to do. Erik and I, at one point, had a case that came in. Again, it was another UFO case, oddly enough, which a man put in his request for an investigation, and it involved a very intriguing sounding case of alien abductions. And we thought it sounded very interesting to us, and so we arranged a phone interview with the man, which is part of our normal process before we actually do the case. We will get the request in, then we'll arrange a phone interview, talk to them, kind of evaluate their story at that point. Then later on, we will arrange for us to meet and do another evaluation of the situation, the location, the people themselves, and then decide from there whether to go on to an actual full investigation. Well, we did our phone interview with this guy. We spoke actually to him for several hours, I believe, on the phone. And he relayed a very complicated case of alien abductions, and then revealed that in some cases these aliens were appearing to him as white owls that he would see in his bedroom window at night. And shortly after that, we finished up the interview, and then Erik and I began talking about it. And Erik said to me, he goes, you know, I just saw a movie last week in which they had these aliens that were abducting people. People were seeing them as white owls. And so when we checked, this guy's story actually came straight out of this movie. It was a piece of fiction. And we would have then spent time investigating something which essentially this man had picked up. I don't want to say that he was necessarily lying to us. He did seem like he really believed this, but that he had been adopted part of this popular culture thing as part of his own personal mythology. We've had other cases in which people have come to us and said, well, we have all this activity in your house. There's knocking on the walls. We're seeing shadow figures. Things just don't feel right. You know, we're very nervous in our house. You know, and we will go out and do the interview with them at their location to see exactly what's going on. And what we'll see, one of the first things that I look at is their DVD collection.
Mm-hmm.
And
books
and books and things
right.
like that. And this one particular case that we looked at, the entire DVD collection was of horror movies. And there were also there were also complete seasons of Ghost Hunters, Paranormal State, Most Haunted,
Mm-hmm.
all of those there.
And also, just to interject, one of those, the woman of the household knew every aspect of MFPS, like better than we did. It was just amazing. We looked at each other like, wow.
Right. And they genuinely wanted us to do an investigation at their house. We actually were able to disprove everything that they were experiencing just there on our initial site survey. In that particular case, one of their claims was they're hearing footsteps that follow them down the stairs. Well, when we investigated, we found out that the stairs were mainly made out of particle board. And that when people would walk down the stairs, the particle board would bend, come down like this, and stay there, and then a few moments later would snap back into place and would create a popping noise. And that's what they were hearing as footsteps coming down the stairs after them. We could reproduce it time after time just by walking down those steps and waiting, and then we would hear them go in order down the stairs, and it did sound like footsteps. But these people really, really wanted an investigation because they'd seen all of our show, Mysterious Midwest, and they'd seen all of the things that we had online and things like that. So we try to screen for that kind of thing now and look into that as we go.
Right, and there's good reason to do that too, because it costs a lot of time, money, effort, labor to conduct a full investigation. And if you're running around just doing that willy-nilly just because someone wants to have a little fun and see something, you know, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time, well, maybe not their time, but you know, you're wasting a lot of resources, and that's pretty important.
And also, there can be something a little more sinister about that. We actually had another case in which we were contacted by a man from Columbus who gave his name. He gave he said he was a retired prison guard, I believe it was. And his house was having all kinds of experiences, and he had these apportations of items that had appeared on, in his house. And we'd asked for him, he talked to us, and he was giving us a rather astounding, but still within the realm of possibility story about the hauntings that he had. But then, when I asked him specifically, can you send us photographs of these items that you have had appear in your house? He sent us photographs, but we were able to look at the photographs, and one of them came from eBay. We were able to trace that back to eBay. Another one was actually cut from a catalog of a jewelry collection. And when we called him on this, we were like, we need to see the original pictures that you say you took on this. And he was like, oh, well, somebody told me that I wasn't supposed to really have anything to do with those items, and I was just supposed to ignore those. So I'm sending you things that just look like the things that I found. Like, oh, okay. We started digging a little bit deeper. We started looking into his address. His address didn't exist. We looked into his name and his background. He now claimed he had retired from being the prison guard and become a private investigator. We asked for his private investigator's license. We never heard back from him on that. When we started checking with the state on other things, this person never appeared as a prison guard anywhere, apparently. And when we confronted on this, we never heard back from him. But he had been pushing hard for us to come down to Columbus to go to this, essentially a field, and do this investigation there. We don't know what could have happened to us if we'd gone there. So, this folkloric and pop culture aspects are important. These are soft sciences again. So you need to have kind of an idea about these things. Now, what I would really like to talk about, and this is where we get into one of the more cutting edge stuff of the soft sciences. There is a recent field of development right now, which is out there called paraanthropology. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the term parapsychology. Parapsychology is the study of basically the unknown aspects of the human mind. Paraanthropology is the study of the paranormal and the unknown as it relates to human activity, human culture. everybody has a cultural context, and those belief frameworks actually shape a lot of the paranormal beliefs. We know that things like belief can actually cause things to happen in some cases. This doesn't really get recognized in the hard sciences, but when we actually look at it in the field, there's case after case of these things actually having an effect. Originally, I believe it was a sociologist, anthropologist named Bronislaw Malinowski, who did a study of magic among the islanders in the Trobriand Islands, and he noted that within their context, their sorcerers could point a finger at somebody, and that person would still stick and die. And that became recognized as that structure of belief. You probably heard that within the context of other things as well, such as voodoo, where people will say, well, you need to believe that in order for that curse to work on you. Well, if you're within that cultural framework, you're going to believe that kind of thing. And that's why, one of the reasons it's going to have that effect. There's no hard science reason for it to occur. But culturally, there is a reason for it to occur. And that is a lot of what I'm trying to bring into this, is actually collect that sort of soft science data that an anthropologist would, but while looking at it in the context of a modern American culture. And there's different aspects to that, because there's going to be a religious aspect, there's going to be an educational aspect, there's going to be an ethnic aspect to it, and all of these things combined together provide us with a framework of things we need to look at. Not everybody believes in the same things, and so not everything occurs to people in the same way. When we work on a case where that has become a part of it, we need to actually work within we tend to work within the comfort zone of the client as far as what it is. We don't, I mean, if we're working with a Christian client, then we try to keep things within their belief structure, because that's easier for them to do it. If we think they're open to it, we may offer them solutions and things like that that come from outside that cultural context. And sometimes that works, and sometimes that doesn't work. Some people refuse that sort of thing. We actually had an ongoing case in Bath, Ohio, in which the couple are they're more or less a Christian couple, but we've had to delve into this particular case. Ended up going to a stage we don't normally go to, which is basically a house cleansing, and
actually twice.
Twice, yes. It's not something we normally do. Normally we find that just working with people, managing their fear and things like that is what actually causes their situations to kind of die down in this. In this case, that didn't work. And we went finally to this stage of the house cleansing. And during the house cleansings that we've done it twice. The first one was primarily a Christian house cleansing, in which I used the names of the angels and saints to come down and drive the entity out of the house. But I also used a little bit of pagan things in that first cleansing as well. When it worked for about a year, and then the entity came back. And now, in this next cleansing, I not only did some Christian aspects to it and the pagan aspects to it, I also brought into it Islamic aspects to it, because we believed that, and you were here yesterday, you heard Rosemary Ellen Guiley speaking about the jinn. We began to believe that actually the being that was in this house harassing the small little girls in the house was actually a minor jinn. So I brought in some of the Islamic aspects of driving away jinn spirits. So while we normally will work within that cultural framework, we can also learn and be able to bring in aspects of other cultures as well when we do these kind of things. Now, how is paraanthropology different than parapsychology? Parapsychology is, these days, actually more interested in the hard sciences aspect of it. They want the repeatable data. Paraanthropology, they want to look at the trends. They want to look at, within this group of people, within this subset of people, this tends to be the way things work, and you tend to see these kind of paranormal occurrences. While within this group of people, you tend to see this other kind of paranormal occurrences. And then you can compare and contrast between those things and be able to develop basically a structure in which you can actually show what is likely to cause these events to occur, and possibly even be able to reproduce them in the field. It doesn't work so well when you remove all of those things from their cultural frameworks and try to do it in a sterile clinical environment like a laboratory, because it needs all those other aspects to it in order to actually fuel the occurrences.
And that's kind of why we take some of these hardcore sensor technology into the field and put it into the situation. It's kind of hard to say, well, we want you to come to a controlled laboratory so that we can do this experiment. That's not necessarily going to work. Exactly. So by being able to be portable and take the lab to the location, that allows us to work with these sensors and work with this stuff in the environment where this stuff is occurring.
Exactly, and Erik can talk more about these sensors right now. I mean, we've done some experiments in the past in the field, such as sensory deprivation experiments at a known very active haunted location, Farnham Manor, over in Richfield, and we'd like to use some of the new technologies that he's going to talk about right now.
Okay. So with the introduction to the soft sciences that he spoke of, what we're going to do is we're going to go through this. I'm not going to go through this word for word. I'll just kind of ad-lib on this because we've been having some glitches, maybe a ghost, I don't know. But we're going to do an introduction to sensor technology here, okay? Now we're going to show some of the sensors. You can get a look at them out at our table throughout the day. But what sensor technology is science. It's science and paranormal research. What we're going to cover here is science and paranormal research, introduction to sensor technology, new log sensors, experiments and studies using sensor technology, data collection and analysis of evidence, video, short little video demonstration of live data collection, and then we'll have some closing remarks. Okay, excuse me. If this glitches out, Tony's pretty quick. He'll reset it. He's working the PowerPoint. The scientific study of paranormal activity is crucial to understanding the phenomena. And very important, actually, because this is where you're going to get your concrete proof. This is where you're going to be able to take that data and you're going to be able to show scientists that, hey, we've got repeatable data. Here it is. And that's what the scientific community is going to look at to accept that there is paranormal activity. Go to the next one. Okay, this is an introduction to sensor technology. Sensors are everywhere, okay? They're in your phone, they're in your house, they're everywhere, and they're used all over the place. What we did is use this as a high-tech layer on top of everything that we normally use in the field for paranormal research. And by putting this extra high-tech layer, it allows us to take what normally would be, yeah, we got an EMF reading here, we've got we got an EVP here, that's great. We got something on video here, but how can we prove this? Because a lot of times you watch something on YouTube or you listen to audio, the scientific community is going to look at that and say, well, that could be faked. That could be this, that could be that. You got all the skepticism that's over a lot of this stuff. So what we're doing is we're taking this sensor technology and we're using it as an additional layer on top of the traditional methods so that we can actually monitor and document in ways we could never do before. Tony, next one. And we do this with new log sensor technology. And what these things are is they're little modules that we can connect together. They're autonomous sensors, which means they can work by themselves in situations that we need to. For example, if I were to take, say, 3 of these sensors, and I had 3 of them, one monitoring, say, the electromagnetic field in that area, another one monitoring motion, another one monitoring, light, full spectrum light, not just visible light. We're talking infrared and UV. And I were to place this in an area with the cameras and some of the other traditional technology that we use, I could program these to do what I want them to do and sample the data at any rate that I want. Could be 10 times a second, it could be 100, it could be 3,000. Some of them I could sample up to 10,000 times a second. So I could capture stuff that would normally not be able to be seen or even understood on traditional methods with EMF meters, video recorders, and audio recorders. These sensors are small, compact, and when I place them in the area, they can run for hours, even days, up to 31 days, and capture that data.
Without any interactions.
Without any interactions. I can then come back at a later time, take those out of the location, and download that data to the computer, and be able to correlate that to any occurrences that may have happened during that period of time. And that gives us the additional layer up here on top of what we used to have. So, and there's our little glitch. Okay, all right. This is some of the experiments, and this is only just a few of the experiments and studies using this sensor technology that we can do. We're talking about physiological responses to paranormal activity, and that could be how someone reacts in the presence of activity that's occurring. Because a lot of times someone can say, well, I got goosebumps, or I feel this, or I feel that.
I feel a cold spot.
Yeah, I feel a cold spot. But how can we actually determine that? A lot of times, like a Mel meter or some of your other meters can't react quick enough to a temperature change that may occur rapidly. So we want to correspond those physiological responses of that person at the same time recording the environmental data so that we can actually have a solid, scientific, repeatable record of what happened during that experiment and during that study. We're talking about object movement and vibration detection, environmental interaction with energy fluctuations, all kinds of energy fluctuations. Long-term studies in a secured environment, and ultra-fast capture and analysis with speeds up to 10,000 samples per second, which is something that no traditional EMF meter or other device can do. For example, your standard Mel meter, it has an update sample rate, I believe, 7 times a second. So you can miss something, especially in a critical scientific study. You can miss something. When you're doing something that you need to capture milliseconds, something that's basically 1,000th of a second, you want to be able to see that, and you want to be able to capture that and be able to analyze that. That's where this comes in. Okay. The data collection and analysis of evidence. What I kind of just touched on was the traditional methods of data collection during a paranormal study or exploration were accomplished with audio recorders, video recorders, and so on, and writing down various, readings on your meter and stuff like that. Well, this kind of, again, gives us that cap above that and gives us that layer that we can actually take it far, far, greater into this into the future of studying paranormal activity. So, Tony, next one, because we already covered some of this. These are some of the sensors, and this is only a few of what we use. And I'm not going to touch on all these for time because, we could be here all day. But we're talking about sensors like infrared sensors.
And we know how long you could talk, so.
Infrared sensors, EMF sensors, humidity sensors, okay, remote LCD view so that we can actually go into a situation, plug it in, check the data out and say, okay, we're at this, nothing really important, pull it out, continue recording. We're talking barometric pressure sensors. We're talking Wi-Fi adapters that allow us to connect this stuff to our tech location wirelessly. So for example, say we've got a study going on down here in the cellar, and we've got various sensor technology hooked up down there, and tech say somewhere out here in the front. Well, we can connect up an access point and be able to monitor that without having to run wires, so that we can actually monitor that real time at tech. Some of the stuff that we monitor for like physiological responses are an electrocardiogram. We have galvanic skin sensors. We have respiration belts. And to some that sounds like, oh, that's lie detection. Well, yeah, it could be used for that, but it's more or less for doing the comparisons between the responses that someone is feeling to the environmental and collecting all that data so that it can be compared and logged and graphed. Some of the other ones would be motion, force sensors, full spectrum light sensors, and so on. We probably deal with 38 different sensors. The combinations of all these together open up the possibility to thousands of experiments that we can implement. And it's just a matter of what that situation needs at the time. Okay, Tony, next. Now, I don't know how well you can see this, but we can, too far. I don't know how well you can see this, but what this is just kind of a basic look at the interface. This would be at the computer, and we would be able to graph in real time at tech and be able to watch what was going on every second of every sensor that's being utilized in that current study. Each time we do this, we can export that data in many different formats, and that data can be used in other programs like MATLAB and so on to be able to enhance the study of that location and be able to correlate the responses between what's going on in the environment with that person and be able to have something that you can repeat. Because when you set up a study or an experiment, you can actually take and save that study or that experiment, and then you can load that and repeat that. So that's the beauty of this. And what this is showing is a quick 10-second experiment that I created here, which we don't want to do any lengthy one, obviously. So we set up the parameters of the experiment that we want, and we start the EVP session or what we're doing, and this is a real-time graph of those sensors that are actually being shown back at tech. And keep in mind that you don't lose this data, because this data is exported and saved in many different formats, including table formats, which will allow you to look at point by point by point comparisons to what happened during that paranormal study in that location. So, why do we do this? To some, it seems like a lot of trouble. Well, yeah, it can be. But what we feel is, in order to bring a solid body of evidence to the scientific community, we're going to need more than just, hey, I got a K2 hit here, or hey, I got this EVP. Yeah, that's impressive to some, but to the majority of the scientific community, they look at that and they go, that's nothing, that's not proof. And yesterday, when George Norrie was up here talking, and the panel was here, I heard some discussion about that, where I believe Mary Ellen, or was it?
Rosemary Ellen.
I'm sorry, Rosemary Ellen. Maybe it was her, maybe it was one of the others, but they were talking about how the technology is getting better to enable this proof to be given to the scientific community so that they can actually say, hey, maybe there is life after death. Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at raising the bar and looking at what the scientific community wants and trying to reproduce that so that when you hand it to them, whether it's in a study that we do and then we publish that study, or it's in a study that we hand over to people that want that, to analyze it themselves. But regardless, it allows us to look at ways of giving them that body of evidence that they can't come back on and say, well, that's nothing. They have to look at it serious. And that's the whole point of doing this. And it is a lot of trouble. It's a lot of training. It's a lot of effort. But we believe it'll be worth it in the long run. And we've been implementing this probably for about a year right now. And we're just going to continue working out the kinks and getting more advanced with it and collecting that data.
And educating people like
And
you guys
educating people,
about
right.
the possibilities of this.
So, anyhow, Tony, you can go to the last slide now. Okay. I just said my closing remarks, basically, but I want to, trying not to run over on time here. I want to open it up for any discussion, any questions, because I know some of this stuff tends to be a little bit technical, and I'm trying to make it as painless as possible. But if you have any questions, now's the time, and I'll see if I can answer them for you. Yes?
How much do you charge for an investigation usually?
We don't charge.
We don't charge. No, we're a nonprofit organization, and we do not charge for investigations. We're there to help people and to advance the study of paranormal activity. Any other questions?
In the middle.
Are you able to take the sensors that you said you could set somewhere and be away from them?
Yes.
And depending on certain parameters that you set, you can have it activate visuals such as cameras.
We can do quite a bit with it, actually. It really just depends on how we program it. And
Like a motion camera, at a cabin, are you able to use it as sensors to say, okay, turn on that camera?
we can modify some of them. Yes, there are some of the sensors that we can modify to do that, but we can't have them work off a trigger. We can set a trigger level. We could say, like, for example, if we have an EMF sensor, and that's a very basic one, but I'll say if we had an EMF sensor and we said, we want you to trigger on anything more than 10 milligauss, okay? And at that point, we want you to trigger and start recording, okay? These things do not hesitate when they trigger. They trigger so quickly, and we're talking on some of these sampling at 10,000 times a second. You do the math. These things will trigger quicker than anything that you can, like an audio recorder, for example, you set for voice activation. That's slow in comparison to what these things can do. If these things are running constantly, what's that?
The audio recorder down takes like a second to
Yeah.
to register.
I mean, you're talking about a thousandth of a second. You're talking about something that's,
I just do it, like, for the layman, scientists, it'd be nice to have a visual, you know, like, I'm a visual person, like, you could do a visual with your data, along with your data.
yes, you can. When you export this data, you can manipulate it in various ways. You could show it in hundreds of different types of plots and graphs. You can export it and just do virtually whatever you want at that point. And that's the beauty of it. It can actually be exported, and you can send someone the data file, the CSV, or the CVS file itself. What that is it's basically a text delimited format file with all the data. You could send that to a university or to someone, and they can take that data and import it in, and it's going to have everything they need to run their analysis on it. Coupling that with any of the video or audio that's captured, that is all time-stamped and synced together. We actually make sure that everything is time-stamped and synced together. Any other questions? Yeah.
Okay, technology is already so advanced. How much further do you think it can go?
In my opinion, the sky's the limit. It's just how much money, how much time, how much effort you want to put into it. The technology, like for example, these are already starting to become not old, but there's new generations on the way out or on the way in. And it's going to raise the bar 5-10 times above that.
And one of the other things that we should point out is these are actually really affordable compared to a lot of the other technologies that are out there.
Right.
So.
Right. I mean, we're not talking about, a $500,000 investment, in lab, grade, equipment and stuff like that. We're talking about just a few $1,000s, but there is a learning curve, and you've got to be able to understand what you're looking at. That data is very, very important when you're looking at it to make sure that you understand what that correlation is and what you're looking at.
All right, well, I think we're going to probably finish things up. We'll still answer questions out at the...
One more question? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
In any of your cases, have you been like scratched or anything like that?
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, we have. Actually, we have had several cases where that kind of thing has happened to us. So, we've got some pictures online, actually, of some of the scratches.
Yeah, I actually had a incident where I had 3 scratches on my back.
He's been pushed also.
I've been pushed. I've had quite a bit.
Nobody's died.
Nobody's done it. Not yet, so. That hardly ever happens. So.
Yeah. Which is a good thing. Okay.
All right.
You want to go ahead and close here?
Thank you
We
very much.
just really want to thank you. And Tony, thank you for taking care of the glitches
Yeah.
and saving the day for Monroe Falls Paranormal Society. The presentation is always interesting because of the equipment that they do manage to find and learn how to use. That's one thing about the equipment. There's a lot of equipment out there, but I've worked with so many different teams through the years, and I have also worked with different teams, outside of, and I found that a lot of times you get the equipment and you never really realize putting it in a box and putting it away. I don't think with this team that ever happens. They really utilize it and search it so deeply.
Right. We actually have training. We actually have training that we put a lot of the members of our group through. Scott and I have developed a rather extensive curriculum. We make sure that people understand when they're looking at a measurement that they, hey, what unit of measurement are you on? Do you know what you're looking at? Do you know what milligauss is? Do you know what microtesla is? Do you know what this value is? Because that's important. One thing before we close that I've seen happen a lot, especially on the TV shows that you see, the ghost shows, you see someone running around with an EMF meter, they have it sitting there and they're holding it, and they say, I got a 3, I got a 10. You know, do you even know what that is? Because it's important, because to be taken serious, especially by the scientific community, you've got to be able to document this. And you got to be able to understand, hey, this is what I'm looking at, and this is why we're seeing this. And it's not because I'm trying to put down these people, it's just that we have found over the years to be taken serious, especially by the scientific community, you've got to have repeatable data, and you've got to have accurate data, and it's got to be in a format that they can look at, because you're talking about physicists, engineers, you're talking about some people with PhDs, they're looking at this stuff, and they've got to be, yes?
But isn't that sometimes impossible, because paranormal is hardly ever repeatable? It happens when it happens.
Great question.
Exactly, yes.
Great question. We've talked about that many times.
That's where some of the soft science approach comes into it, because many times you can't repeat it in a laboratory kind of setting and with that kind of data and things like that.
Right.
But you can show that there are correlations when using soft sciences like anthropology, sociology, taking those kind of measurements in that sort of a format rather than in the harder sciences.
Exactly. And when we can set up an experiment that we can repeat, that's wonderful. That's beautiful, because that gives us data that we can, that's hard data, that someone can look at and say, hey, this is repeatable. This is good. But when that fails, we have the soft science to back us up, even though they may not accept that as empirical hard data, at least it gives them something to bite onto,
Yeah,
something
you
to
can
look
look
at.
at it in terms of, rather than being absolutely repeatable, being statistically relevant.
Mhm.
So you're going to have, well, this happens, 60 times out of 100. Well, that's pretty significant, as opposed to, well, this is just completely random, so it happens, 45 times out of 100 or whatever, so.
Right, and I will say this, if you are serious about bringing this kind of data to the community, document everything most accurately as you can, and keep those records, in order. And, that's gonna be the most important. We have mounds and mounds of data and documentation. We've got like a 6 gigabyte or 6 terabyte drive that we keep a lot of this data on, and we got backups of that, because when it comes time that someone looks at us, and we have had this real quick, I know we're running out of time, but we have actually had a couple of psychologists from SUMA, they PhDs, had approached us because of the data that we collected and worked with us, and we shared our data with them to help them further understand and study what they normally would do with their psychology. So,
All right, so we will be out at the table all day today, so if, in between sessions or whatever, you can come out and ask us more questions out there if you need. So, thank you very much.
thanks.